Hello. Well, I'd like to welcome you to this presentation about responsible conduct of research or research integrity at Purdue. I'm Dr. James Moeller. I'd like to welcome you, and what I want to do is spend just a little bit of time talking, and it doesn't matter whether you're a returning graduate student or a new graduate student. There's some things that you need to make sure that you're aware of relative to research to make sure that things go well for you. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what do you do in situations where you think a research misconduct might take place, what is research misconduct, and then what do you do if you happen to find yourself in a situation where you've observed it. So what I do, let me move my face out of the way here. So here's my contact information should you need to get a hold of me. I am the Purdue Research Integrity Officer. And so I have to deal with matters of research integrity when things don't go the way they should. There's a process that I follow, and that's a little bit what we're going to talk about. My phone number is listed here for you, as well as the two emails that you can reach me. Again, at the end of this presentation, I'll show them again. So, with that, let's talk about, as a research integrity officer, what do I do? What do I focus on? Well, the first thing that's most important is I protect the integrity of the research record at Purdue. One of the things you're going to find as you do research is that you do all this background reading of things that people have done in the past, and then you build your research based upon stuff from the past. That's why we have a literature review section or a prior work section in almost every paper or thesis or dissertation stuff that we write, because we're building on the work of others. So my job as a research integrity officer, and why research integrity is important, is because if you can imagine in your particular field, if there's one article that's most important, let's say in your field, if all of a sudden you found that was, that there was misconduct in it, all of a sudden that would unravel all the research. So the primary responsibility of a research integrity officer is to protect the research record, and you do that by stewarding the research misconduct policy and the procedures. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is here in a few minutes. And because there is a process, one of the things we have to do is make sure that we follow that, and that we, that every individual has due process, and so that there's an opportunity that if someone's accused of research misconduct, they have an opportunity to state their case, and it's basically adjudicated by a committee. That's the key thing. And then the couple other things that I do, obviously represent Purdue at a national level, and then promote research, doing videos and things like what I'm doing right here, recording this video for you. And so it's kind of the role of the research integrity officer. So with that, first I want to say that we do have a website. I don't expect for you to remember this URL. If you do a search on Google, if you search Google for Research Integrity Purdue, you'll come across the Research Integrity website. But all of the information and a lot, probably more than what I'm going to present here, is included on the website should you choose to take a look at it. Now, there's a whole slew of federal regulations that researchers at Purdue have to abide by, and so I will tell you that many of these regulations I'm familiar with. I don't know all of them by heart, but it's my responsibility on behalf of the institution to make sure that we're following them. And almost all of them, well, I will say all of them, have some type of statement about research misconduct and procedures. And there are a lot of similarities. There are some differences. And it's not going to necessarily be expected of you as a graduate student to know all those federal regulations, but there are some things that you're going to want to dive into as you get started in the research in your particular area, of your particular research lab, or with your major professor. And one of the best ways you can do that is just start by having a conversation with your major professor about some of the regulations you might need to be aware of, and kind of, what are the policies and procedures that your lab operates by, or that faculty member operates by. So that's a really good place to start if you're a new graduate student, is to have that direct conversation with your faculty member. Because, as a graduate student, while you are under the tutelage of a major professor, you still have responsibility. You still have a stake in this, and there's still things that you have to follow and abide by participating in research. And key thing is to realize that conducting research, working on research in any place, is a privilege. It's not a right. And so you want to make sure that you're following policy and procedure as you do so. So with that, let's talk a little about, I mentioned research misconduct. We could talk about it from an integrity standpoint, but I want to just focus on research misconduct proper. And so let's jump in here. So what is research misconduct? Well, essentially it's conduct by a Purdue associate. If you're a graduate student at Purdue, you're a Purdue associate. When that doesn't matter whether you're on an assistantship or if you're just taking classes as a graduate student, you're associated with Purdue. Faculty members are covered, staff members. This basically covers everyone at Purdue, so realize that first and foremost. Now, what I will say is that research integrity, or excuse me, I should say research misconduct is defined by three things, and they're listed here on the slide: fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. Now, there are other things that have to do with integrity in research, but they don't fall under the research misconduct policy. I mean, we still have to deal with them, and we'll talk about some of the things that are not considered research misconduct, but still could be an integrity issue. But under the policy proper, we have fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, sometimes said, we just call it FFP. Fabrication is creating fake data, right? And that fake data could be numerical, it could be physical, it could be images, right? So fabrication is creating fake data. Falsification is taking data that you have and modifying it to say something it really doesn't say. In other words, basically modifying it to say what you want it to say. And then lastly would be plagiarism. And so plagiarism is basically literary theft. It's basically stealing the ideas of another or the words of another by not properly citing them and giving them attribution. I will say of all the research misconduct cases, probably 50% of them are plagiarism. This is one that as a graduate student you want to be very careful of taking the words. So when you're taking notes from any source, you want to make sure that in the notes that you take, it's very clear that they're not your words. Matter of fact, I would go so far as to say you want to basically in your notes make sure that there's a page number there, because you're going to need that when you cite it, as well as the source that you got it from. So just the biggest one that I can say for graduate students is being careful of plagiarism, but also fabrication, falsification. So that's the first issue. Second thing is that there has to be culpable intent for research misconduct to take place. So what is culpable intent? You can see that I have this word honest error versus reckless, knowing, and intentional. So culpable means that that you did it, right? So that you could say you're guilty, I suppose, right? So on one end, I purposely used, on one end I have honest error. So misconduct, research misconduct, is not honest error, right? So if you honestly make a mistake, and that's why we go through this, that's why we go through an investigation process when there's a research misconduct claim. But if it's honest error, it's not misconduct. But if it's not honest error, then we have to determine, okay, is it reckless? And that's why I kind of put those words, if we go back to the slide there, you can see I put the actual words out here in kind of a continuum. So kind of like the least worst example of culpable intent would be reckless. You were just reckless about it, but you might not have been knowing and intentional. So we make this determination. It's really can be somewhat difficult to make these determinations, and that's why there's a committee put together to make these determinations. But we have to figure out to what degree, what was the state of mind of the individual when they committed research misconduct, assuming they did. Right? So that's the second part of the research misconduct, or defining what research misconduct is. And then the last thing I want to note is that it is in all forms of research. It's in all aspects of research that you conduct, right? So when we talk about research misconduct, it has to do with anything you would propose, anything you would perform, anything you would review, anything you would report, and anything you would publish. So anything that's pretty much associated with research is covered under this policy. So the reason that I kind of make this point is sometimes people were like, well, you know, I wouldn't plagiarize in a journal article or a conference proceeding, but if it's in a proposal, it's okay. Or if it's in a lab, my faculty member asked for a lab report and I needed to fudge those results a little bit so he or she would be satisfied. Know that it doesn't matter whether it's in a small report that you did to your faculty member that's not going to be published, or whether it was actually in a journal or conference. It's the same thing. Right? So research misconduct, if fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism happens in any of those forms, proposing, performing, reviewing, reporting, or publishing of any type, it could be considered research misconduct. So that's enough kind of a high-level view of research misconduct. And I didn't say it at the beginning, but if you're watching this video and you end up having some questions, feel free to send me an email. Let me know that you watched the video, and then you kind of frame your question. We can have a little bit of a dialogue. We could even do a Zoom or a WebEx or whatever. So with that, let's move on to, so what's not research misconduct? At the beginning of this video, I said that research misconduct is defined as fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism. But there are several other kinds of integrity issues that could be problematic. but they just don't fall under research misconduct. And a lot of times those integrity issues I have to deal with, right? So let's talk about some of these examples. So first of all, research misconduct. If you're just, if you do research and it's just plain wrong, or if you're controversial, that's not research misconduct. And matter of fact, that's probably not even an integrity issue. I mean, we don't publish to, purposely be wrong or to, so on and so forth. But authorship disputes. A lot of times authorship disputes, people will bring those to the Research Integrity Office thinking that that's a research. It is an issue of integrity, but it doesn't fall under the research misconduct policy. Similarly, when we talk about issues of credit, acknowledgement, and citation, in other words, who is on a publication and what orders, the name, so forth, that's not research misconduct. Relational disputes between co-authors. Now I will say I wear two hats. I'm Associate Dean in the Graduate School. I'm also a Research Integrity Officer. So one of the hats that I wear in the graduate school is oftentimes I deal when there's a dispute between colleagues about publication or about research as far as co-authorship, or even that next bullet that says student advisor relationship disputes. Oftentimes I'm involved in those if not from the Rio side, from the grad school side. So realize these are integrity issues oftentimes, or could be, but they don't necessarily fall under the research misconduct policy proper. So. And so you can see the rest of this list: intellectual property disputes, conflicts of interest, human and animal subjects issues, as well as what are called questionable research practice. So while these things can be integrity issues, they don't fall under the misconduct policy proper. Now, so what happens if first of all, is it likely that you may, if you stay in research, will you see some kind of research integrity violation? Possibly. It's likely. And so you need to know what do you do if you happen to observe this. So at Purdue, the RIO, the Research Integrity Officer, in the role that I currently serve, processes the allegations of potential research misconduct. And then again, it's by any Purdue associate, and it's generally within the last 6 years, although there can be exceptions made to go further back into time if needed. Note that anyone can make allegations, and all Purdue associates, and so that includes you, all Purdue associates are required to report anything that you observe as potential research misconduct. And so how do you do that? Well, you basically can go online and email via Research Integrity at Purdue. You can report it to the provost directly, and he'll forward that to me. Or you could send it you could actually do it through the Purdue hotline, totally anonymously. All of those are mechanisms by which you can report research misconduct. The key is that if you observe something, key is keeping it confidential. You don't want to talk to lab mates about it, or a department secretary or someone. You essentially want to bring it to me as the Research Integrity Officer, and then I follow the process. Realize also, I realize that sometimes people are like, oh, well, I don't want to report it to you because then you have to do something, and that's right. But realize you could give me a call and we could have a hypothetical, conversation. Hypothetically speaking, if someone were to see this or that, you could have that kind of conversation with me. Just kind of test the waters and make sure you're on track. So realize that I think I'm a pretty approachable person, and so I would encourage you, if you run into issues, definitely to contact me. So what do we do if there is a research misconduct proceedings? Well, here's basically the steps, and earlier I provided the website to you, and you can actually go to the website and read it if you have trouble sleeping. It's a good sedative for you. But essentially what happens is when an allegation comes in, I first do an assessment to determine, does it fit under the policy, and does there appear to be enough evidence to proceed? If my answer is yes to both those things, then we go to an inquiry committee. An inquiry committee is a committee of faculty members that basically answer the same questions. Does it fall under the policy, and is there enough evidence to actually move forward? If that committee says yes, then it goes to investigation. Another faculty committee looks at it and does interviews with everybody involved, looks at all the evidence, really kind of, as the term, or as the committee's named, it investigates the entire thing at a very deep level. That committee puts together a final report. The person who has been accused can actually appeal those findings. Then the provost institutes sanctions that are appropriate to, and this is assuming that moves. And any of these steps, if at the initial stage, if I don't say yes to both questions, it stops there. If the inquiry committee doesn't say yes to both questions, stops there. If the investigation committee, when they get to the end, maybe they find that research misconduct didn't occur. So at any point there can be a departure from the process, but nevertheless, provost puts together sanctions, and then there can be an appeal process for those sanctions. So who's typically involved? I've kind of already given you a little bit. Typically, we try to keep it to as a need to know, because as you can imagine, if a person is accused and then is found faultless at the end, you don't want it to damage their reputation. Generally speaking, at the beginning of the process, the complainant, the person who made the accusation, the respondent, the person who is the accused, the provost, the involved dean, and then the chair of the Faculty Affairs Committee from the Faculty Senate, as well as myself, are the only ones that know. Then as it moves through, the process, there are a few others that might become aware of it, but we try to keep it, because of how damaging this can be if a person is found faultless, we try to keep it limited. So it's kind of a need to know. All right, so confidentiality. This is the big reason why it's kind of kept kind of quiet, is because we don't want it to hurt people. And it's required by the misconduct policy that it's handled with the utmost confidentiality, because it can seriously damage both the complainant or the respondent should it get out, and so forth. So realize the Purdue hotline is totally anonymous, and we do act on those. So just realize that confidentiality is key. If you see something, talk to me, right? Don't take it upon yourself to try to police it or do something about it. I would encourage you just to forward it to me, contact me, and we can begin the process. So how can you self-monitor? Well, I've put together, here's a couple things. Talk about integrity process, what the expectations of integrity are within your lab, with your faculty member, with others, right? Every graduate student is required to take the City Online Responsible Conduct of Research course within the first semester that they're here. So if you're a new student, you may want to look into that. If you just do City RCR online training in a Google search, you'll actually come across it. Your faculty member can help you how to get through that. If you have difficulties, you could contact me if you're not sure what to do. Another thing that you can do is use Authenticate. Every faculty member has an Authenticate account. Authenticate is basically a word matching software that helps you detect plagiarism, preferably before it's published. And so all faculty have that free account. Graduate students don't have access to the software. You need to work with your major advisor to submit not only your thesis and dissertation when the time comes, but you can also, any papers that you write, co-author, or so forth, you can run through Authenticate. And then lastly, I offer a course, Grad 612, which is a 1 credit hour, 8-week course. It's generally offered about 4 times in the fall and the spring, and then also in the summer occasionally. So if you're federally funded, you're probably going to be required to take Grad 612 because that's a requirement. Many students take that. Now your college or your department may actually offer its own version of this too. So you may take some course in your own department or unit too. So just realize the resources are there. If you're going to be, if research is going to be a focus of your career, you need to educate yourself, particularly on this topic, because it's one of the things that can be most problematic for researchers, both new and returning graduate students. It's just something they need to be aware of. So again, my name is James Moeller. I'm the Purdue Research Integrity Officer. You see my phone number here, as well as my email, jlmoeller@purdue.edu. And again, I always tell people, make sure you put the L in JL Moeller, because J. Moeller is a student that no longer responds to emails, doesn't forward them to me. So you want to make sure that you get it to me. So as you take your journey, whether you're new or returning graduate student, if there's anything that I can do to help talk through issues, whether it be on the research integrity side or even as part of the graduate school, I'm at your disposal. So I hope the semester is a successful one for you, and that you have an engaging semester, and that you enjoy the research that you're doing and the work that you're doing. So with that, may say boiler up and hail Purdue.